Welcome to our webinar on Introduction to the Community Food Projects Grant Program. My name is Sarah Lambertson, and I'm the National Programs Manager for New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. I'm going to take a quick look at the agenda. I'm going to start with a very brief technical overview and then tell you a little bit about who we are, and then do an overview of the grant program, and then review eligibility and match, and finish up by talking about the indicators of success, which is a report we compile each year for the USDA, and we'll take questions at the end. So a little bit about who we are. New Entry Sustainable Farming Project is an initiative of Tufts University, the Friedman School of Nutrition, as well as Third Sector New England, a nonprofit based here in Boston. We were founded in 1998 as a farmer training program, and we still have a strong on-the-ground program.
I'm Tracy.
Oh,
Yeah.
If everyone can make sure that you're muted, that would be great.
I know. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So if we've got somebody who is not muted, there we go. So we have an Incubator Farm as well as a farm business planning course, and a food hub that has a CSA and a food access program. And our food hub is not only providing food to residents of Boston and the greater Boston area, but also is serving as a market outlet for our farmers. We have a farmland matching program as well. So we've got a lot of on-the-ground programming, really focusing on developing beginning farmers and working on our food system. We also have some national programs focusing on training and technical assistance, specifically working with incubator projects as well as community food projects applicants and grantees. So for the CSP Support, we received a training and technical assistance grant from the USDA to support applicants and grantees. So we are grantees ourselves. We have a lot of resources on our website. You can see our website right there, nesfp.org/CFP. This webinar is part of this support, as well as a lot of past webinars that we have. We also offer one-on-one technical assistance, both applicants and grantees. This takes a lot of different forms. For some applicants, it's talking about what's involved in applying for a federal grant, because there are many organizations who've never applied for a federal grant before. Others who are familiar with that process, we might talk more about how their specific project fits in with the program goals, and sort of everything in between. So if you take a look at our website, you can submit a request for assistance form there. You can also send me an email if you have any questions. So we're going to take a look at the Community Food Projects Grant Program. It is a grant program of the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. The program was started in 1996 with the primary goals of fighting hunger and promoting self-sufficiency in low-income communities. The grant program has grown over the years and adapted as new farm bills have come out, but ultimately has remained very much the same. So the program goals are up here on the screen, but ultimately what it boils down to is it's about increasing food access for low-income individuals while also increasing the self-reliance of the community. So that's a really core component of this, is making sure that it's not just about providing food, but it's also about making sure that the community that you're working in is changed in some way so that the individuals are better able to serve themselves moving forward. So sort of at the core of this is community engagement. And this is something that really sort of sets this grant program apart from other grant programs. It's really important not only in the proposal phase, but throughout the grant to have demonstrated community engagement. And they do ask specifically for that in the proposal, that you're able to demonstrate the community engagement that you've done. And this can be through stakeholder meetings or surveys of the intended recipients. But it's really important to make sure that this is something that you're doing before the RFA is released, because this is not something that you want to sort of be doing right at the end as you're submitting your application. This really should be part of your planning process. And in addition to working with your community during the planning process, it's really important in the proposal to talk about what your plan is to work with them throughout the entire grant. And as I mentioned, this is really sort of at the core of this grant program. So it's really important that this is not just something that is sort of thrown in there to make sure you hit that, check that box in the application, but this is sort of really what this grant program is about. Making sure that the community you're working in is part of understanding the challenge and part of coming up with solutions, and also really is benefiting in long-term ways where either they've gained new skills or knowledge or access to new resources so that they're better able to serve themselves as they move forward. So looking at the funding, so in fiscal year 2016, the most recent application, there was a little over $8 million available for funding, and that broke down into implementation grants and planning grants. So you can see the implementation grants are up to $400,000 for up to 4 years. The planning grants are up to $35,000 for up to 3 years. You don't need to apply for the full amount or for the full length of time, but that's what the maximum that's allowed. And just a little bit about the difference between the planning and implementation, and the names sort of say it all, but the planning grants, obviously much smaller in scale, really focus more on sort of diving deeper into the needs of the community. So they are frequently community food assessments or need assessments, really just trying to understand what the needs are. You do need to have some community engagement demonstrated prior to applying for a planning grant, just like the implementation grant, but it's understood that you'll have less of that in place because you're looking for a planning grant. One thing that's really important to be aware of with this grant program is the match requirement. So this program does require a dollar-for-dollar match, and this is something that causes a lot of challenge for applicants because that's a huge match. So if you apply for a $400,000 grant, at the time of application, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have $400,000 in match. It can be in kind or cash, so it doesn't need to be $400,000 of cash, but you do need to demonstrate it one way or the other. So if you have other grants that are for this specific project and the funder is willing to write a letter stating that this can be used as match, that counts. It can't be federal funds, though it can be state funds as long as they don't originate as federal funds. You also can use in-kind, like volunteer time or staff time that's not written into the grant, or partner organizations' staff time, or their in-kind donations, or other donations from the community. So there are a lot of different ways that you can meet this match, but it's definitely something that's pretty challenging to pull together and to pull all the documentation together. So I definitely encourage you, if you're planning to apply for this coming round of applications, that you don't wait until the application is released to start thinking about your match, but that you really start actively working on this now, because this is something, unfortunately, that is a real barrier to some people applying. So eligibility. Eligible applicants are nonprofits, tribal organizations, and public food service providers, and they're required to have relevant experience. So you need to have experience in one of these three areas, either working in community food work with small farms or agricultural products that involve low-income communities, or in job training and business development, again, related to food activities in low-income communities, or have done work reducing food insecurity in communities. So there's a couple of different areas that you can have experience, but they do want to make sure that you do have some relevant experience to give the credibility that you'll be able to do this, as well as they want to be able to know that you will have the ability to manage the grant, the financial side of it, and sort of all that entails. Partnerships are definitely encouraged. So this is not a grant program where they want to see just one application or one organization who's doing everything and has the whole plan figured out. This is really about acknowledging that these challenges are complex and take more than one person or one organization to figure out. So the more robust it is in terms of partnerships and community engagement, the stronger your application is going to be. Your partners don't need to be eligible, so if there's a business in the community that you want to partner with, that's fine. Just the lead applicant needs to be eligible. You are also able to apply through a fiscal sponsor. So if your organization does not yet have your 501c3 status, but you have a nonprofit sponsor who is willing to apply on your behalf, you can do that and have the funds transferred through them to you. So let's talk a little bit about the application process. You apply through grants.gov. If you've never applied through a federal grant before or never used grants.gov, I definitely encourage you to take a look at a webinar we have on our website, and I can send a link to this webinar out afterwards that talks about applying for a grant on grants.gov. It's definitely a fairly involved and challenging process, so I encourage you to think about this beforehand. And there's a couple of things you need to do before you're able to access the application. You'll be able to read the RFA regardless, which has it's the request for applications. But the actual application itself, you need to make sure you've registered for a DUNS number and SAM. So there's a lot of different parts to that. Again, I definitely encourage you to take a look at that webinar. There's an RFA, a request for applications, that is released annually. It likely will not change that much, so I definitely encourage you to take a look at last year's RFA, which I will send in the email at the end of this webinar. That'll give you a really good sense of what they're looking for and what the program is likely to look like. You'll need to obviously read the new one once it's released, but this will give you a really good sense of what they'll be looking for. The new RFA could be released as early as October. I don't know when it will be released. It was in October last year, but it was in February the year before. So there's definitely variability in when it's coming out, but it's always best to sort of be mentally preparing yourself for an earlier release. It's also a very quick turnaround. Last year, I believe it was 5 or 6 weeks, same with the year before. So that might sound like a lot of time, but if you are trying to pull together this application, particularly if you've never applied for a federal grant and you are trying to pull together match letters and partner letters as well as do community engagement, if you're trying to do all of that during the application period, it's going to be really challenging to accomplish all of that and get the application in on time. So I definitely encourage you to start early and start thinking about some of this stuff now if you are planning to apply. The application is a peer review process, so all applications that are submitted on time and are complete will be passed on to a panel of peer reviewers. So they are practitioners in the field, familiar with this work, and they'll be the ones reviewing all the proposals and providing recommendations to the USDA. The USDA makes the ultimate decision, but takes these recommendations very seriously. In fiscal year 2015, 18% of applications were funded. So it's definitely a competitive program, which definitely means that you really have to put together a very strong application. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the indicators of success. This is a report that we compile each year for the USDA. It was originally put together by the Community Food Security Coalition, who used to have the training and technical assistance grant that we have now. When we were awarded the grant in 2014, we picked up where they left off and have been putting the report together since then. It's basically pulling together the collective impact of all grantees in a given year and trying to demonstrate the big picture of what this grant program is accomplishing. And the USDA uses this report to appeal to Congress for funding in future years. It's also helpful for grantees to get a sense of what other programs are working on, and I think also valuable for applicants to get a sense of what the current grantees are doing and what sort of the scope of this grant program is. And I can send out a link to the most recent one, which was released in March of 2015. So this past year, the fiscal year 2015 report, 34 of 50 active grantees submitted information. So just to give you a sense of, I'm going to run through a couple of the metrics from it. So of those 34 organizations, there were 27 different activities represented. And you can see the top 5 here. And again, the rest are in the main report. But you can see food, access, and outreach was the most common activity, and 78% of projects were working in that area. And many projects were working in multiple areas, so this is not an individual activity. This is showing you the different activities that beneficiaries, the ways people benefited. So for this report, we look both at the direct beneficiaries as well as indirect. And the direct are those represented here, people who we can, they attended an event or participated in a training or something clear and specific where we know who they are and the grantee can actually really count them individually. We also try to get a sense of the indirect beneficiaries. So people who are attending farmers markets, it's a lot harder to really get a sense of who those people are and some of the sort of bigger picture impacts of these programs. Definitely harder to pin down those numbers, but we also really want to try to be getting a sense of those. So this is looking at direct beneficiaries and just giving you a sense of the different ways that people are benefiting in these communities. This one here is looking at growing practices and looking at both for projects that are growing their own food as well as projects that are purchasing food. So you can see there's definitely an emphasis on organic practices, whether or not they're certified, as well as sustainable land management. And that's definitely a really fundamental component of this grant program, is making sure that practices being used for the food that they're either growing or purchasing is environmentally sound and really thinking about sort of the big picture here. And not all projects grow food, but if they're not growing food, they're likely purchasing it or distributing it and connected to food in some capacity. And this year is just giving you a sense of sort of the involvement in the community. So these 34 organizations had over 800 organizational partnerships in fiscal year 2015 and over 9,000 volunteers for just shy of 95,000 volunteer hours. So that gives you a pretty good sense of the sort of level of engagement that these organizations have within their communities. So they're definitely working with a lot of people and really touching a lot of lives. And this chart here below is looking at the new leadership roles that were created. So just giving you a sense, there were over 600 new roles created in fiscal year 2015 and gives you a sense of some of the demographics of the people in those roles. People of color represented just over half of them, youth just under half, and women were just under a third. So that was an overview of the grant program and trying to give you a bit of a sense of the types of projects and the sort of the scope of work that's happening. I'm sure that there are questions, so I'm happy to take any questions that you have now. If you want to, feel free to type into the chat window, that would be great. And it looks like I've got some as well, so I'm going to take a look here at what we have. So I've got a question here asking about more examples for in-kind donations. Can they be in the form of services as well as materials? Yes, they definitely can be in the form of services as well as materials. So really you just want to make sure that any in-kind donation that you're getting, that you're able to get a letter documenting that match from the organization. There are certainly some limitations, but if you can get an organization who can write a letter stating the value of their in-kind donation, then it's a good chance that it will be able to be counted. If there's things in particular that you're wondering about, it's probably best to check in with the financial folks at the USDA, but it's definitely good to think outside the box and really try to think about the scope of resources that you can get from your community. Someone has a question about indicators of success between the distinction between food recipients and direct customers. So food recipients are people who are receiving food for free. The direct customers are purchasing food. So a lot of programs work in one way or the other, either giving food out as part of their program, and then there are also many that have customers who are purchasing food. The next question is asking, is this grant restricted only to agriculture? We're currently working on a value chain project in the seafood industry, and we're thinking about using this grant to continue that work. That's a great question. It's definitely not restricted to agriculture. If you are working on increasing access to fresh food through seafood and meeting the other grant requirements, I think that that definitely would be eligible for this grant. I'm happy to speak with you more. If you want to send me an email, we can talk a bit more about it, but seafood certainly would count. Someone is asking for examples of projects that have been funded. I think probably what would be best, I can send out a link to past abstracts when I send this out, as well as a couple of case studies that we've put together. I can give you a few quick examples, but I think that that'll give you a better sense. But one example is a program in Michigan that is working primarily to increase their mobile farmers markets as well as their healthy corner store programs. So they're partnering with a number of corner stores in an inner city area and bringing fresh produce in and really working with them to integrate with the community and connect with the community and increase the customers purchasing that food. And they're also in quite a number of communities with their mobile markets. So really trying to figure out what the barriers are. And in their community, the barriers were physical, geographical access to food. So really trying to bring that food closer to the people that it's benefiting. Another question, would it work for an African-American low-income co-op grocer in formation? It depends on the legal entity type for the co-op. If it's structured as a nonprofit, yes, certainly. If it's structured as a for-profit, no, it wouldn't work, but could be partnered with a nonprofit who's eligible to apply. So it depends a little bit on the structure there, but certainly the type of program, as long as the lead applicant is eligible. Someone's asking if the program should be new, not already existing programs. That's a great question. They like to fund either new programs or an expansion of a current program. So if you're writing a proposal to really just continue a program as is, it's probably not going to get funded. So it's important to either think about how to create a new program or how to really innovate and expand a current program. A question of how old can a community food assessment be if you want to apply for an implementation grant? That is a great question. I think it would really depend on how relevant the information still is. If it's 15 years old, that's probably not going to still be super relevant. But if it's 2 to 3 or maybe even 5 years old and you feel like the information in there really is still relevant, I think that could probably be used. I think if you were using something that's several years old, it would be really important to make sure that you're reconnecting with the community and understanding the changes that have happened in the intervening time. I think you probably wouldn't be able to use that as your sole source of community engagement, but I think it certainly could help. Is there a definition or threshold for low income used for this grant? That is another great question. I believe they are using federal guidelines, federal poverty guidelines, although I'm not sure exactly where it falls. That's certainly something that I could look into and get back to you. Brianna, if you want to send me an individual email to remind me, I can certainly look into that for you. Someone's asking to explain fiscal agent representation. So new entry, for example, we are not our own 501c3. We're not our own nonprofit. So Third Sector New England is our fiscal sponsor. They are a nonprofit and they have agreed to be our fiscal agent. So we have a formal agreement with them. When we apply for a grant, we write the grant. based on our own work as new entry, but representing ourselves as a project of Third Sector New England. Third Sector is the applicant on the grant, and we pay a percentage of that as a fee to them to administer the grant for us, but the grant is coming to us. I can certainly talk to you more about that if that's something that you are looking into, but it's pretty common for a lot of smaller nonprofits. Question, can the match be from general operating funds from the organization? So if you have cash that you want to allocate to this project, you most certainly can. General operating funds, I need to know a little bit more. My sense probably is that it might not be included. Anything you're using from your own organization to provide as match really needs to be geared towards this specific project. So if you're talking about sort of general operating expenses that are used for all of your projects, I think it's unlikely that those will count. But again, it does depend a little bit on more specifically what you're talking about and if they are related specifically to this project. Someone is asking if the presentation or the slides will be available or if there'll be a replay. I will be sending out a recording probably tomorrow. I am happy to also make these slides available, and I can send those in the email as well. Someone's asking if I can point them towards successful food cooperative planning grants. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to look into that for you. I think I've got one in mind, but it's probably best if we do that through email. Someone's asking how community is defined. There is not a definition of community for this program, but it tends to be within a fairly limited geographic span. There are some programs that are sort of operating on a larger basis. I don't believe there are any real statewide programs. They tend to be within, if it's in a city, within the city, potentially within a neighborhood. In a more rural area, it might be a couple of towns, but a community in the sense that you're not really spreading across the entire state. You're really sort of fitting within a fairly defined area. Someone's asking about indicators of success slides. I will certainly send the slides out so that you can get a better look at those. I'll send the report out as well in case you're interested in taking a look at that. The next question, we work with a local group that works with local farmers and provides a subsidized share market, especially low-income residents. Can grants be used for this type of program? Yes, certainly. I would need to know a little bit more about the specifics, but that's definitely the type of program that this could be used for. Someone's asking if the grant amounts are per year or spread out over 3 years. Thank you for clarifying that. Those are spread out over 3 years. So the planning grant is $35,000 total for over 3 years, and the implementation grant is $400,000 total for over 4 years. And as I mentioned, you don't need to do the full amount or the full time. There are limits to the amount you can do in any 1 year. For the implementation grant, the maximum per year is $125,000, and so you could do that just for 3 years and do $375,000 over 3 years without spending more than the $125,000 per year. Someone's asking if conservation districts, which are part of the local government with urban agriculture programs, are eligible. That's a great question. I don't believe local government programs are eligible. I could be wrong, and I'm certainly happy to check on that for you. So if you want to send me a private email to remind me, I can definitely check on that for you, but I don't believe that they're eligible. So you might need to find a local nonprofit to partner with. They certainly would be able to be very involved in it, but I'm not sure they could be the lead applicant. Someone's asking if a planning grant funds can be used to create an agritourism plan and interpretive plan for a farm site. We have interpretive panel and visitor center exhibits teaching sustainable gardening. Will the planning grant cover interpretive planning and agritourism planning? That's a good question. It's a little tough to say without knowing more about it. Just right off the bat, it doesn't sound like it would necessarily, since it doesn't sound like it's as focused on increasing access to low-income individuals for food. I'm certainly happy to chat with you more and get a better understanding, but sort of my initial read on that is that I think it probably wouldn't be a fit. Another question, I've been reading about Wholesome Wave and the work they do with the Double Bucks program in Michigan. This is a program where they can use their SNAP benefits, but they're given 2 for 1 if they use their local benefits on fruits and vegetables. I'm not sure if there's a question there. If there is, let me know. I'm aware of that program. It's definitely a great program. There's a lot of encouragement to work with other federal programs. So a lot of people do work with other federal programs in this grant program, but let me know if there's another question there. Next question, does there have to be an implementation phase, or could this just be research phase of project be funded? If this would be research needed to expand and improve a current food bank. That sounds to me like it would be better as a planning grant. If you're applying for the implementation grant, you definitely do need to have an implementation phase, but if you're just trying to understand how to expand and improve, a planning grant might be a better fit there. Can funds be used to hire staff? Yes, they can. All right, would starting an incubator farm so that gardeners can begin to sell produce at farmers markets, for example, fall within funding guidelines? We are a nonprofit working with community gardeners looking to start an incubator grower program. Yes, that's definitely the type of program that would be involved. You want to make sure, obviously, that you're working in some capacity with a low-income community, but an incubator farm is definitely falls within this grant program. Can permaculture design and implementation be covered? Would design be under planning or implementation? Good question. It sounds like if it's design, it would potentially be under planning, though could be implementation. And again, you just want to make sure that you're focusing on a community and increasing the access. So if this is being used for that purpose, then I think it certainly would fit. If not, then it's maybe not a good fit. Another person looking to learn more about the co-op planning grants. And I see an email in here. Laura, if you don't mind emailing me directly so that I have it in my inbox, it'll be much easier for me to respond to you. Someone's asking if we've ever funded food councils. Just to clarify, new entry, we are not the funders, so this is funded by the USDA. We have a training and technical assistance grant to provide support. So just to clarify that. Food councils have certainly been funded. They tend to be, I don't believe they usually do funding solely for a food council. It tends to be part of a larger project typically, but food councils are definitely part of this work. Someone's asking if I could talk a little bit more about what the grant reporting is like over the course of a year. So the grant reporting is sort of broken down into 2 main areas. There is reporting for the indicators of success, which is that report that I mentioned. So after your first full year of having the grant, and this is not so much for planning grants, but for implementation grants, after the first full year, you're asked to submit, fill out a survey that looks at, number of people served, pounds of food, the demographics of people, trainings you provided. But I work pretty closely with grantees on making sure that they understand what their needs are going to be or what they're going to be asked up front. So if you get the grant and we talk at the beginning of the year and you have a sense of what you're supposed to be recording, I think it's not so challenging. The other is the annual report for the USDA, which is through their report system, and that's really talking about the progress that you've made on the goals and objectives that you put in the grant and what you're planning to do in that coming year. So it's not a ton of reporting. It is definitely something that you need to be thinking about, but it's not such a burden. Someone is asking if there's a list of groups participating in this call that are available to facilitate collaborative applications. That is a great question. If there are people here who are interested in having their information shared, please let me know. I won't share information otherwise, but I'm happy to do that if there are people who want to do that. I can put a reminder in the email as well, but I think that's a great idea if there are people on this call who are interested in connecting to collaborate. Someone says here that public agencies are eligible, so that conservation district, I guess, is eligible. Someone's asking if federally funded in-kind can be used. No, you can't have any federal in-kind match. It needs to all be, you can have state funding as long as it doesn't originate as federal funding, but no federal funding can be used. Someone's asking if there's a different timeline for planning and implementation. I'm not sure if you mean for the application. There is not a different timeline for the application, or if you mean for actually doing the grant. For actually doing the grant, the planning grants tend to be much shorter. They are typically a year or two, whereas implementation tends to be typically 3 or 4 years. But I'm not sure if that's what you mean. Someone's asking if there's reporting for planning grants. For planning grants, it depends on how long they are. If they are more than a year, you will need to do the USDA's annual report and a final report, but it wouldn't take very long to do the reporting for a planning grant. Someone's asking what kind of participation impact numbers are compelling. Can a project be a specific geographic area, i.e. a tribal reservation? Yes, you could definitely do a specific geographic area like a tribal reservation. It's a little hard to say what, I think projects are funded on very different scales. So there are certainly projects that are on small scale that are really involved in their community, and particularly if you have sort of a discrete geographic area such as a tribal reservation, I think that that's a definitely compelling pitch because you have sort of a clear community that you're working within. And others are definitely larger. I think if you're working with a smaller number, you want to make sure that you have sort of a deeper level of engagement with those smaller number of people. So it's a little tough to say what the right number is. I wouldn't say that there is one. But just really making sure that if you're working with a smaller number of people, that you are really focusing on going deeply with the people in that community. Are faith-based organizations eligible? Yes, they are. Can a nonprofit apply for both a planning grant and an implementation grant at the same time? I believe technically you might be able to, but it is strongly discouraged. So I would definitely recommend that you determine which one is the better fit for you and apply for the one that's the better fit. I wouldn't encourage you to apply for two, and I'm not sure that they'll accept two. And if they would, they don't encourage it. And then between when the planning and implementation is funded, Mary, between when the planning and implementation is funded and would we need to apply for each separately? I'm not exactly sure what you mean. You do need to apply for them separately. They're each funded the same. They're both in the RFA every year, so you could apply for either one this year. But they're different grants, and you need to apply for them in different years. I'm not sure if that's answering your question. Someone's asking if there's a preferred reach for a project in a particular area. I think that really depends on the area that you're working in. I don't think there is a preferred reach because I think it depends on the community and the needs in that community. And sort of like I was speaking with the tribal organization, that if you're reaching a fewer number of people, making sure that you are sort of having higher impact with those numbers. But there are definitely programs in densely populated urban areas that cover a small geographic area, and projects in rural areas that really cover a larger geographic area, or projects that really sort of hone in on a particular group within a small area. So I think it really depends on what the needs are of that community and how deeply you're going to be working with the individuals. Someone's asking about getting the PowerPoint. Yes, I will send that out in an email afterwards, so you'll all have the PowerPoint. Someone's asking, what type of activities would an implementation grant fund for a new sustainable farm? We're training at-risk youth and veterans to work at the sustainable farm. It would fund a lot of different aspects of that, but I think maybe it makes sense for you to reach out to me individually, and we can talk a little bit about what that specifically looks like. I think it really depends on what your focus is for the work and what you're trying to accomplish, but the funds can definitely be used for quite a lot. It can't be used to purchase capital equipment for the most part, or construction. But it can be for funding, programming, and staff and things like that. So someone is mentioning that they have been on the review panel and that applying for both grants negatively impacts both applications, and may even have the grant application disregarded, even though it's technically allowed. So, technically, yeah, so it's allowed. So like I was saying, definitely not encouraged, and I think it's really best to focus on either the planning or the implementation, whichever one is a better fit for you, but I definitely do not encourage you to apply for more than one. So that is the end of the questions we have at the moment. I'm happy to answer more that come along. I also definitely encourage you, I know there were several people that I asked to email me specifically. I think if you reach out to me, we can go into a little bit more depth on some of these questions. Sometimes it's a little hard to know with, there's a lot of sort of specific details that are important in these sort of things. So feel free to reach out to me and to take a look at our website. And again, I mentioned several things throughout that I will definitely put in an email, as well as the slides and the recording. And yeah, so I don't see any other questions coming through. So I guess we will wrap it up here. I really appreciate everyone joining today, and I hope that this was helpful. And I look forward to working with you.